When I first arrived in Lakewood, it felt like stepping into a movie stuck on repeat. A quiet American town, green hills, and a lake with a smooth surface reflecting the sky like a mirror. The whole place seemed to exist in slow motion, while I felt like a runner who had suddenly stopped after a long race. I needed a break, though I hated admitting it. Henry and Melissa, my uncle and his wife, took me in. They lived in an old but well-kept house overlooking the lake. Melissa, energetic and a bit strict, clearly cared about keeping things in order, while Henry, he was the opposite. Calm, measured, he always found a way to ease tension without saying much. The house was spacious, with a large porch furnished with wicker chairs and a small table. The first thing I did after moving in was sit there with Buster, my fluffy Pomeranian. He promptly settled at my feet, as if he already knew we'd be staying for a while. "Are you sure you're okay?" Henry asked, interrupting my thoughts. I turned to see him standing in the doorway with a cup of coffee. His face wore a slight smile, but his eyes held a hint of concern. "Yes, I just need to adjust," I replied. And it was true. After the chaos of the big city, Lakewood's silence was almost deafening. The first week was spent adapting to the household routine. In the mornings, Melissa went to town for meetings while I stayed home with Henry. At first, we barely crossed paths. He worked on his projects in the workshop, and I focused on my freelance work at the computer. But one day, he knocked on my door holding a wooden frame. "This is for your paintings. Found it in the garage. If you'd like, I can show you how to make more," he offered. That was the beginning. We started spending time together, crafting frames for my art projects. Henry turned out to be a remarkably patient teacher. His hands, strong and skilled, handled the tools with ease, and he enthusiastically shared his knowledge. "Have you thought about exhibiting your work?" he asked one day, carefully sanding down a wooden surface. "I'm not sure I'm ready," I admitted. "It feels like I'm still searching for my style." "We're all searching for something," he replied, his gaze thoughtful, as if he wasn't just talking about me. Buster, as usual, lay at my feet, snoring softly. Warm light filled the workshop, making the atmosphere almost surreal. I felt a calm I hadn't experienced in a long time. But there was something else I began to notice. The more time I spent with Henry, the stronger a peculiar closeness grew. Not like that between relatives, but something subtler, yet undeniable. I tried to dismiss it, chalking it up to gratitude for his support. But sometimes his gaze lingered a bit too long. I told myself it was just my imagination. Lakewood, with its stillness and slow pace, was making me feel things that probably weren't real. But deep down, I sensed there was more ahead than just a quiet life in a lakeside house. Over time, I adjusted to Lakewood's unhurried rhythm. The town, which had once felt unfamiliar, gradually began to feel like home. Morning walks with Buster along the lake became a ritual. The water was dark and still, like a mirror reflecting the trees and the occasional cloud. In those moments, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. But things with Henry grew more complicated. We spent more and more time together, and I struggled to understand where the boundaries lay. He was attentive and empathetic, sometimes too much so. It felt like he understood me better than anyone else ever had. One evening, when Melissa was at a meeting, Henry suggested we take a walk. We went out to the backyard, where there was a gazebo overlooking the lake. The air was fresh, slightly damp from the water. Henry carried 2 steaming cups of tea, handing one to me as he sat down on the wooden bench. "This place has its own kind of magic," he said, gazing into the distance. "When everything feels overwhelming, all you have to do is look at the water. It seems to carry away all the unnecessary things." "Have you ever wanted to leave here?" I asked, captivated by his calm demeanor. "No. But sometimes I think I miss the movement, the new emotions," he admitted, turning to me. His gaze was warm but deep, like the lake itself. We talked about life, about what we had lost and what we were searching for. I told him about my failures in the city and how hard it had been to start over. He listened without interrupting, and that was new for me. Most people try to offer advice, but Henry simply accepted my words. At some point, I noticed the silence between us had changed. It was no longer just silence. It was something tangible, as though words were unnecessary. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice barely audible, almost a whisper. I nodded, but my eyes said more than I could express. Henry looked at me for a long time, and I felt my heart start to race. It was a moment when everything could change. And it did. He leaned in slightly, and I realized I was moving toward him too. Our faces were so close I could feel his breath. It happened quickly, but it felt as though time had slowed down. His lips touched mine, gently, softly, yet enough to make my head spin. It was like stepping onto uncharted territory, thrilling and terrifying all at once. We pulled back, and Henry looked as though he wanted to say something but changed his mind. His expression was full of doubt mixed with something indescribably deep. I felt something growing inside me, something I had been trying to suppress for a long time. "Emily," he began, but at that moment, Buster barked, breaking the moment. We laughed, as if nothing had happened, but we both knew everything had changed. That kiss changed everything. The only question was whether we were ready to admit it. The morning began like any other. A cup of coffee on the porch, the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze, and Buster lazily sprawled at my feet. But inside, I was restless. I couldn't stop thinking about the previous evening. The kiss with Henry wasn't just a fleeting moment. It was a line we had crossed, a moment we couldn't take back. I avoided him all day, pretending to be engrossed in my laptop project. I still couldn't shake the memory of how he looked at me after the kiss. It wasn't just a look, it was a question he didn't dare ask, and one I wasn't ready to answer. By lunchtime, I decided to take a walk. Buster, sensing my decision, wagged his tail enthusiastically as I reached for the leash. We walked along the familiar trail by the lake, and as always, Lakewood's tranquility wrapped around me. But soon, the quiet was interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind me. I turned to see Melissa. "Emily, are you all right?" she asked. Her voice was calm, but I could see a flicker of concern in her eyes. "Yes, just trying to clear my head," I lied, hoping she wouldn't sense my unease. Melissa joined me, and we walked in silence for a while. Then, she started speaking, and her words caught me off guard. "You've probably noticed that Henry and I aren't exactly a typical couple," she said, not looking at me. "What do you mean?" I asked cautiously, my heart beating faster. Melissa stopped, gazing out at the lake. "We've had our issues. Things were good in the beginning, but over the years, something changed. We're more like partners than spouses now. I'm okay with it, but I'm not sure if he is." I didn't know how to respond. Her confession sounded both sincere and oddly detached, as though she had made peace with it long ago. "Henry," she turned to me, her gaze piercing. "He's a good man, but he has a past, one that explains a lot. Maybe even what's happening now." My chest tightened. What could she mean? My silence was the only response I could manage. "Just be careful," she added, offering a faint smile, though it carried an undercurrent of sadness. Then she walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. When I returned to the house, Henry was in the workshop. He looked focused, absorbed in his work, but when he noticed me, he smiled immediately. "Want to help?" he asked, gesturing to an unfinished wooden table. We worked side by side, and the tension between us felt almost tangible. At one point, he placed his hand over mine to guide me on how to hold a tool properly. It was a fleeting touch, but it sent a shiver down my spine. "Emily, what are you thinking about?" His voice was soft, almost a whisper. I looked at him. His gaze was serious, penetrating. This was a moment when I could either tell him everything or keep the truth hidden. But instead of answering, I lowered my eyes and took a step back. "We need to talk," he said, his voice carrying a firmness I hadn't heard before. In that moment, I realized something from Henry's past was about to surface. The evening wrapped Lakewood in a soft golden light, but inside the house, the atmosphere felt tense and heavy. After Melissa's cryptic words and Henry's steady gaze earlier, I knew I could no longer avoid the truth. Whatever was hiding in his past was pulling us both into a whirlwind that threatened to unravel everything. Henry suggested we talk in the living room. We sat across from each other, and the weight of the moment settled between us. Buster curled up in my lap, as if sensing my unease. "There are things I haven't told you," Henry began, his voice low and serious. "I'm not proud of my past, Emily. It's not something I've wanted to share with anyone, especially not with you." "Henry, you can trust me," I said, though I felt my own nerves trembling inside me. He exhaled deeply, looking at me as if weighing whether to continue. Before Melissa, I was in a complicated relationship that didn't end the way I wanted it to. I thought I could leave it behind and start fresh. But the truth is, the past never really goes away. I stayed silent, afraid to interrupt, afraid to miss a single word. Melissa and we're together, but not really. Our marriage is more of an arrangement. We both wanted stability, solitude in a way, but love faded somewhere along the line. His voice faltered, and he looked away. I didn't know what to say. His confession confirmed what I had already suspected, but hearing it out loud brought a flood of new questions. Why was he telling me this? And why now? Emily, he continued, his eyes locking with mine, I don't know how to explain what's happening between us. I know it's wrong, but I feel like we're drawn to each other for a reason, one neither of us fully understands yet. The silence that followed was almost suffocating. I wrestled with conflicting emotions. What he said validated feelings I tried so hard to suppress, but knowing they were mutual only made everything more complicated. What do we do now? I finally whispered. We can ignore it, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Or we can be honest, with ourselves and everyone else. I nodded, but I couldn't find the words. He took a step closer, and I felt my hands begin to shake. His gaze held both doubt and determination. He reached out, and without realizing it, I met him halfway. Emily, I don't want you to feel like you owe me anything, he said softly. You mean more to me than I can put into words. This isn't simple, I replied, trying to keep my emotions in check. And then something unexpected happened. Henry suddenly stepped back, giving me the space I didn't realize I needed. I'll give you time, he said, his voice gentle but firm. And if you ever want to figure out what this all means, I'll be here. I watched him leave the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Buster pressed closer to me, as if offering silent comfort. Henry's words echoed in my mind, questions, uncertainties, and the weight of a truth I wasn't sure how to face. But I knew this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning of a new chapter. We had both made choices that didn't bring us clarity but gave us a chance to search for the truth. And maybe, in the stillness of Lakewood, we'd finally understand what it was we were looking for.